Hey everyone, welcome back. Are you ready to dive into a new topic?
Always excited to explore something new. What are we digging into today?
Well, today we're going deep on ancient giants. We've got a whole bunch of research lined up, academic papers, folklore, even some old historical records. It's going to be fascinating to see what we find.
Sounds intriguing. I've always been interested in these kinds of mysteries. Where do we even start with a topic as massive as ancient giants?
Right. Well, the cool thing is our sources cover it all. We've got some possible physical evidence like, those really large bones and artifacts, but then we've also got all the myths and legends about giants from cultures all over the world.
Yeah, it's amazing how these stories pop up in so many different places. And where those two things overlap, the physical evidence and the myths, that's where things get really interesting. So, as we're going through all this, what do you think, expert? What's the biggest challenge in trying to figure out what's true when it comes to ancient giants?
Well, I think separating fact from fiction is always a challenge. And with ancient giants, there's so much that we just don't know. But I have to say, some of the archaeological finds we're looking at today are pretty wild, like those elongated skulls found near those Neolithic temples in Malta. Remember those?
Oh yeah, how could I forget? Those were found near those massive stone structures, right? It's hard to imagine how they were built. And then those skulls just vanished, which just makes the whole thing even more mysterious. And what throws me is they were with tools and artifacts that are from way back, like the Neolithic period. So if they were human, but with naturally longer skulls than usual, what does that mean about the people who were around back then? And then there are the stories, the reports of these really huge skeletons being found in different places around the world.
Right, but those are often dismissed as hoaxes.
Right.
Or people saying they were just misidentified animal bones.
Yeah. I mean, I get why it would be tricky to figure out if they were real or not, but it does make you wonder, is there a reason people are so quick to dismiss those finds? Is it just because the idea of giant skeletons, it just doesn't fit with what we think we know about, how humans evolved?
I think you're onto something there. This idea, these giant skeletons, it really challenges our whole understanding of human history and evolution. It's natural for people to be skeptical when something seems so out of place.
That's true.
And honestly, proving these things aren't as easy as just taking a quick picture and saying, okay, rewrite the history books. It takes a lot of careful work.
Oh, definitely.
You need, carbon dating and DNA analysis. And you got to compare the bone structures to other human remains. And even then, there's always a chance for mistakes or just really strange things happening naturally, and we can't forget about hoaxes.
Right, people trying to pull a fast one.
Exactly. Plus, there's a part of us, I think, that kind of wants to believe in giants,
Oh, totally.
it's just, there's this excitement about the idea that maybe there were these massive beings roaming the earth. Our ancient past is so much more mysterious and complex than we realize.
It definitely captures the imagination, right? This idea that maybe our history isn't quite what we thought it was. And speaking of captivating, we can't forget about all the stories. I mean, there are so many cultures with tales about giants. We've got the Jotnar in Norse mythology, the Nephilim in the Bible, the Titans from the Greeks. It's like every culture felt the need to include these massive beings in their stories.
And it's not just their size.
Right.
They're always depicted as incredibly strong, right?
Yeah, superhuman strength.
They can move mountains, fight gods. Remember the story of Ymir, the giant from Norse mythology?
Uh-huh.
His body actually formed the world. His flesh became the earth, his blood the oceans, and his skull the sky. Amazing, right?
It's an incredible image. So, do you think these stories, could they be more than just stories? Could they have started from something real, something our ancestors actually saw, and then over time, those stories got exaggerated? Like a game of telephone, but with myths.
I think that's definitely a possibility. Even if we don't take these myths literally, they still tell us a lot about the people who told them.
Oh, definitely.
Like that story of Ymir, with his body shaping the world. That might reflect how ancient Scandinavians saw the power of nature. Imagine seeing glaciers carve out valleys, the land literally reshaped before your eyes.
Right, it's like forces they couldn't explain.
And remember, these were people who experienced the raw power of nature firsthand, without any scientific understanding of what was happening. They didn't have the same explanations that we do. So, attributing earthquakes or volcanic eruptions to the anger of giants, well, it's a way of trying to make sense of a world that can feel very chaotic and unpredictable.
It's like using those big, larger-than-life stories to understand these big, awe-inspiring, even scary events.
Mm.
And it's interesting because it's not just ancient cultures that were drawn to giants, right? Like, we're still dealing with their legacy even today. It's like those stories about giants, they never really went away.
It's funny you say that because I was just thinking about some of the stuff we read about King Og in the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
It said his bed was 9 cubits long,
9 cubits.
which, if you do the math, is over 13 feet.
That's huge.
That's a giant bed.
Mm.
And then you've got, like, those ancient historians like Josephus,
Right.
who just wrote about giants like it was known fact.
Mm.
And let's not forget those really old poems like the Book of Giants. You remember those describe these, like, epic battles?
Oh, yeah, between giants and angels, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's hard to just ignore all those stories. It's like they're everywhere you look.
Yeah. I mean, it does make you think, with so many different sources, all these stories from so many different places, they can't all be made up, can they?
It's true. It's tempting to think that way, right? But, like we've talked about, just because there are a lot of stories doesn't automatically mean they're true. It's easy to get, like, swept up in the wow factor.
Yeah, right.
Especially with these really old texts.
Definitely.
But we have to keep in mind that back then, history, myths, religious beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't always so clear-cut. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What one culture might have written down as a historical event, another one might have seen through a more, like, mythological lens.
Oh, I see.
So how do we even start to figure out what's real and what's not with these ancient stories? It's tricky.
It really is, yeah. So where do we even start with that then? How do we try to figure out what actually happened?
Well, one way is to look for clues that back each other up. So, like, do we see stories about giants from different cultures around the world, cultures that were separated by time and geography? Because if we do find those connections, that gives those stories more weight.
Oh, that's interesting.
We have to remember, too, it's not just about what they said, but who was saying it and why. Were they trying to just document history, like a timeline? Or were they trying to teach a lesson, maybe a moral or religious one? Or maybe they were just trying to tell a good story.
Oh, interesting.
Understanding their reasons for writing it down helps us look at the information more critically.
It's like piecing together this giant puzzle, huh? We're trying to find those connecting pieces.
Yes.
To see if we can make a complete picture.
And just like with puzzles, some pieces might be missing.
True.
And we might never find that one thing that definitively proves giants existed. But listen, just because we haven't found absolute proof yet, doesn't mean we should stop looking.
Yeah.
It just means there's still a mystery to solve, which is exciting.
It keeps it interesting for sure. And actually, this whole idea of giants, it feels like it's more popular than ever.
Really?
I mean, look at how many people are into like those alternative archaeology ideas.
Yeah.
And there are all these online groups dedicated to finding evidence of giants. Our research even mentioned a few people who believe that giants built Stonehenge and the pyramids.
Wow. What do you think about all that? It's interesting to see how people are still captivated by this idea.
It is interesting, right? It makes you think, why are we still so drawn to these mysteries? What is it about the unknown that just like pulls us in?
Well, I think that curiosity is a good thing. It pushes us to discover new things and look at the past in different ways.
That's true.
But there's a difference between real scientific inquiry and what some people call alternative archaeology. Sometimes those alternative theories can be really interesting,
Oh, yeah.
but they don't always use the same rigorous methods as, like, mainstream science. And that can lead to some pretty wild claims.
Right, definitely. So how do we balance that excitement for these big mysteries with being like, smart and careful about the information we find?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think it's about being humble. We don't know everything. Our understanding of the world is always changing, right?
It's a good point.
And that means being open to new evidence, even if it challenges what we think we know. We got to stay curious, but also stay critical.
Critical thinking, super important.
We live in a world with so much information. It's easy to get caught up in a good story. But we have to stop and ask ourselves, is this really backed up by evidence?
And speaking of evidence, when we're looking at those theories about giants building those massive structures, were there any examples from our research that like really stood out to you? Or was it mostly speculation and interpretation of old myths?
Honestly, a lot of those connections, they seem to rely on circumstantial evidence or their interpretations of myths, like trying to find proof in those old stories, like Stonehenge, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Some people point to those massive I mean, they weigh tons.
Right. And they say there's no way people back then could have moved those things without some kind of, super advanced technology, especially with the tools we think they had back then.
Right.
But on the other hand, we're always learning new things about how resourceful ancient people were, right?
Yeah.
They might have used techniques that we don't even know about anymore, stuff that's been lost to time, and maybe we haven't rediscovered those methods through archaeology yet. It really makes you think, like, how more do we not know about the past?
Exactly. It's like, just because we haven't found proof of something doesn't mean it never existed.
True. And it's not just those structures either.
Right.
I always think about those stories about giants fighting gods, angels, like reshaping the world, even changing history. And those stories show up everywhere.
You're right. And those stories usually show giants as these powerful forces that shake things up. Remember the Greek Titans? They fought the gods for control of everything.
Oh, yeah.
Or the Norse frost giants. Their battles were powerful enough to, like, shake the world.
Literally.
And those stories, they might reflect how, back then, people were just trying to deal with how unpredictable and powerful nature can be. Or maybe it was about their own struggles with power.
So we've got those really old stories, but then we've also got more recent stuff, like those 19th century newspaper articles about those giant skeletons found here in the U.S.
Oh yeah, and don't forget about those rumors that the Smithsonian is hiding giant bones.
Of course. So what do you make of all that? How do those more recent accounts fit in?
Well, those 19th century reports, it's interesting to think about them because back then, archaeology was just getting started.
Right.
The ways they verified things weren't as good as they are today, which makes it almost impossible to go back and be like, okay, let's check that again.
Because we just don't have all the information.
Exactly. And those Smithsonian rumors, talk about a conspiracy theory spreading quickly. It's crazy how these things take hold, especially now with social media.
Right.
The Smithsonian has denied it so many times.
If so, it's not true.
But because there's no real evidence either way, people just keep believing it.
It's strange, right? You'd think that when there's new proof, people would just, let it go. But it almost seems like the lack of something concrete to look at makes it even more believable.
I think it's because people like to solve puzzles. If we don't have all the pieces, we just fill in the blanks ourselves.
We make our own conclusions.
Yeah, sometimes even if the evidence says something else. So after going through everything, all those old texts, the archaeological reports, even those modern theories, where do we even begin to answer this question of ancient giants? Did they exist? What do we know?
I don't know if we have a clear answer, but I think just asking the question and trying to find the answer, that's what's really important. There's still so much we don't know about our planet, about history, about ourselves,
It's about being okay with not knowing everything and being open to new discoveries, even if they completely change everything we thought we knew.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll find something that just blows the whole ancient giants mystery wide open. But until then, we're stuck with these little breadcrumbs, these clues and mysteries and stories that capture our imaginations.
And that's the beauty of it all, right? The search never really ends. And hey, listeners, we've got a ton of resources linked in the show notes, articles, books, even some of those historical documents we talked about. So if you're ready to keep digging into the mystery of ancient giants, head over there and check them out. Because as we've learned today, there's a lot more to this topic than meets the eye. Who knows what other mysteries are still waiting to be discovered?